Welcome everybody to live Q&A. This is Pastor and the Recovering Heretic. I am Pastor Dave, and with me is Dan.
The Recovering Heretic of aforementioned title.
Hi Dan, how are you?
I'm great.
Good.
Feeling very heretical today, so.
Okay, fire away.
Good one. Today, because it's Advent, we're going to continue. Hopefully, all the Q&As until Christmas will be about the holiday.
Yeah.
Some way, shape, or form. Today, I want to talk about how Martin Luther changed Christmas.
Okay.
You know, I titled it "How the Luther Stole Christmas," but you had alluded last week that Christmas used to be a very somber holiday.
Or more somber.
Yeah. And I got the impression from you when you said that that was part of the Reformation too. That the tone of Christmas changed a bit. And we can start with something light, like the story of, and it may be apocryphal, but the story of Martin Luther and the Christmas tree.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it changes with the Reformation. And to be clear, there is a sense of joy about it, but it's not the kind of commercial family fun joy that we kind of get, you know, like.
And my impression was that was the big change, Martin Luther. Right? Before, I mean, you know, it was very liturgical.
Yes.
And after Martin Luther, it became a little more family-oriented.
Well, yeah. Again, like a lot of that comes blame Dickens more than, you know, but Luther does have an emphasis on piety at home. It's one of his kind of constant things he's hitting on is he thinks it's family's responsibilities to be pious at home, you know, and they've got to take ownership of that, you know.
But to clarify, and just because pious has a lot of extra baggage in modern America. So to clarify that, when he says pious, he doesn't mean somber, fasting, you know, more of a Puritan type attitude.
Right.
And Martin seemed to enjoy joy.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not right. Luther's not a Puritan by any stretch of the imagination. But he thinks it's responsible for you to be, I guess I would say, doing the religious things in your everyday life, you know. And so there's a lot of practices we have around Christmas that are, Luther didn't invent them. They are German practices, Northern German practices, you know, that have been going on for centuries before Luther, that Luther emphasized because he thought they were good practices at bringing that kind of piety out of the church into everyday life, you know, not just liturgical, ceremonial, but, you know, so Advent wreaths are the big example here. Like, the Advent wreath is actually not something that is necessarily, we make a big deal about it in church, but it's actually meant to be something you do at home. You know, it's supposed to be an entirely at-home practice of, you know, and it's supposed to be this way that you do readings and, you know, and all that stuff, you know, and praying and celebrate the season of Advent at home, you know. Christmas trees are a similar thing, right? It's not that Luther invented the Christmas tree. It's been a Germanic practice around Christmas for a very long time, you know, but it's become a universal thing like the Advent wreath has, you know, because Luther thought it was good as a practice to do, again, at home.
Did he invent the lighting? Was that his adaptation to it?
No, I mean, people have been figuring, various cultures have put, you know, the Swedes put candles in it, you know, things like that, right? Like, all these Northern Germanic peoples have been, you know, doing lighting around trees and decorating trees for a very long time, you know. But they extended across, you know, kind of the celebration of Christmas because it, again, it was this effort to get people celebrating these things at home.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. What I'm wondering is why the formal Roman Catholic Church in the medieval period, why they didn't encourage it at home in that same way. Why was it more liturgical? And we can get into this part later, but even hymns. You know, hymns were for the choir. And it seems like Martin Luther wanted people singing at home, so thus influencing caroling in that regard.
If I can be generous, Catholic brothers and sisters, I'm trying to be generous here. I'm probably failing. But if I put this generously, our Catholic brothers and sisters sometimes have this attitude of, that's not going to work. Try not to be insulting. Our Catholic brothers and sisters have this very top-down view of how grace and worship work. And
so even grace is hierarchical.
Right. Grace is hierarchical, and it's something that is received from God through the church.
And then dispensed through the church.
And then dispensed through the church's hierarchy to the people.
Okay.
You know, so in that sense, there's not a whole lot of point in kind of the at-home piety stuff, right? Because you receive it from the church. So if you want to go to daily mass if you want daily piety, is kind of that, you know, like go to mass more frequently, go to confession more frequently, you know, like go receive it from the church more frequently. The church is about doing it every day. This is why there is daily mass and why there's daily confessional hours and, you know, like all that kind of stuff, right? You know, if you really want to be serious about it, go join a monastery. You know, like grace is this thing received from the church, through the church, you know, from God through the church, dispensed out into the world.
Okay.
Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's nice. You should probably do it, but you know, you're not an ordained priest, right?
Yeah.
So at home. So you don't have one just hiding in your closet, you know. So again, if you want that stuff, go to evening prayer, you know, this is why you do the cycles of prayer, right? Luther didn't wholly upend that, right? We do believe grace is received through certain means dispensed by the church, right? Baptism and Holy Communion, you know, that we literally call them the means of grace. They are literally dispensed by the church, you know, from God through the church. But there's this greater sense in which, you know, justification, with the emphasis on justification by faith, that, you know, part of what you're doing when you're doing those things is you know, all faith is in the Lutheran tradition is trusting in God's promises, you know, and so that's something that for Luther daily needs to be cultivated, you know, like daily we need to cultivate that trust in God's good promises. So personal piety becomes a lot more important because it's about cultivating that trust in God's good promises.
So that ended up being Martin Luther's big motivation in how he was adapting these Christmas traditions.
Often, yes. Okay. Yeah.
So
yes.
I want to distinguish, too, because we focused on the Roman Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
The Orthodox Church has its hierarchy, but doesn't seem to be as hierarchical quite as the Roman Catholic Church. So is it the same that the Orthodox Church also expects you to come do it in with the church, or they make more room for personal piety?
I don't know them as well, but they have a totally different conception of it. They don't think of worship as something you go to. They think of worship as a realm which you enter, you know, and you can kind of freely enter in and out as the worship is going on, but the worship is always, you know, and in a certain sense, it's always going on, right? You know, and so that's why in Orthodox churches, people come and go. If you'll notice, they'll walk in halfway through. They'll, you know, like we think of it as an event to be attended.
Right. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Right.
You must be there for the whole.
Right. They think of it as a realm that exists that you enter in and out of, but it's always existing. Yeah, right. So like their masses go on, you know, there's morning prayer, and then there's actual high mass, and then there's, you know, concluding prayer, right? And it's like
you can come in and out at any point.
Right, and you kind of come in and out at multiple points, and you know, on their high holy days, they literally go on all day. You know, like Good Friday. This is actually why John, like that sermon I love, John Chrysostom's Paschal homily is so short. Is because up to that point he'd preached like 6 times before then. You know, all of which are much longer. You know, and by that point it's late in the evening and he's on the Easter Vigil and he's really tired. You know, like, and so like, but worship is this realm you enter, you know, this physical space, dimensional space that you enter into, and you know, you kind of wander, you permeate in and out of it, but it's not an event, it's a space that exists.
It's fascinating. That's a lot closer to the Norse belief.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's different. It's a little different than that, but yeah, it's, you know, it is just a very different way of thinking about how worship works. Yeah. You know, I sometimes think we would be better for it, you know, because if you go to an Orthodox, you'll see people moving about and they're lighting candles while, you know, worship's going on, you know, and so in the one sense, it makes personal piety a little less important, right? Because if you're not in that space,
you're not actually worshiping.
Yeah, right. You know, but on the other hand, it can make it more important because once you're in that space, you're supposed to do the things, you know. And so, I don't think it's more or less. It's just differently thought of because, you know, there's this space you enter. Orthodox homes frequently have like little corners for icon walls, you know, and that's a mimicking of that space again, right? It's a physical realm that you enter into, you know. Here's our icon wall, and we have a little kneeler in front of it, and so when we enter into this little space, we've entered into little worship space, you know, and so Keith just says a little pocket of the realm, and that's a good way to think about it, you know, and
household pocket dimension.
Yeah, right. Your own little pocket dimension, you know, and so that's just it is such a different mindset because for us, worship is an event, and for them, it's again this dimension, this realm, this space, time continuum thingy that you enter in and out of, you know.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
A bubble you can pop in and pop out of, you know.
Just so you know, Steve grants you sub-papal dispensation. He says, growing up in the Catholic Church, this isn't even close to the worst he's heard about.
Well, you know.
So he had grace at home, but that was mostly praying around the dinner table.
Yeah, right. I mean, there are these practices, and then this all gets more confused in America because, like, American culture is functionally Protestant. You know, even American Catholic culture is, in many ways, responding to a fundamentally Protestant culture, you know, and so it gets weird here. It just does, you know. I mean,
when I was, you know, researching for this episode, you know, I was coming across all these things that are relegated to their origins being a result of the Reformation.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, in American Catholic households, their tradition, man, you better not buck it.
Right. Well, you know, I mean, there's a lot in the Catholic Church which is in response to the right. You know, it comes from the Council of Trent, which was the council they held, you know, in response to the Reformation, right? You know, and so even the stuff the Latin Mass is like one of the, like the kind of Tridentine Mass. They kind of sometimes want to act like it's existed for all time. It's actually in response to the Reformation. It comes from the Council of Trent, like, right. Wow. Yeah. Right. Like it hasn't existed since Adam, like, that doesn't mean it's bad, it doesn't mean any of that's bad. It's just one way or another, we're kind of responding to our social location.
Yeah, it's just fascinating to me how much social influence now permeates what we think of as the formal theology of Christianity. Mm-hmm. And in reality, it's culture.
Yeah, so right. So Keith is using a great word that when I was in seminary our senior year, they tried to get us to de-seminary our vocabulary. Every time you used a theology term, we were supposed to drop a quarter. Like in normal conversation, you used a theology term, you're supposed to drop a quarter in the bucket, and it went to charity. And I had a friend who just stuck a $50 bill in it and walked away. He's like, "There, I'm covered." But fancy theology term, right? Ideaphora or ideaphora. And in Greek it means indifferent things, but there's a lot that's actually neither commanded by Scripture nor explicitly prohibited by Scripture, and is not expressly confessional, in our confessional documents. And so, you get a lot of freedom within it, right?
Keith is saying keep things in good order.
Yeah, we do a lot because it's it's good. It keeps things flowing, right? But jettisoning them would destroy the faith, right? It's actually, we've talked about this with the creeds, but like it's a narrow. The actual list of dogmas is actually fairly narrow, right? It's the Nicene Creed stuff. It's God created the world. Jesus Christ is the incarnate Son of God, begotten, not made, of one being with the Father. Right, through him all things were made. He was born of the Virgin Mary, crucified, risen. That's all done for our salvation. We'll come again.
And that's...
and then it's...
Nothing about blessing golf clubs.
Right, well, right, no car, no glick. Yeah, and then it's the Holy Spirit exists, is the life of the world. Baptism, baptism forgives sins, and we look for a renewed world, and the church is a real thing, and like that's kind of the list of dogmas,
It's all encapsulated right there.
Right, and then within the Lutheran faith, we have a few addendums, justification by faith, absolute dogma, that, right, like, you're justified by grace through faith, like, cannot be negotiated, absolute dogma, So we have a few other ones, but for the most part, it's most, it's the same list of dogmas, right? Yeah. And, but it's a narrow list, and so a lot of what we do from, the Christmas tree to the candles, there's this wonderful note in the all our worship books, right? Our hymn books come with a minister's desk addiction, which actually explain everything in them, and there's this wonderful note
in the annotated version.
I do. It is. It's literally the annotated version of it, and there's this wonderful little note in the minister's desk edition of the Green Book, which we've all totally ignored, which is, it says the candles are to be lit with a minimum amount of ceremony, because they are totally functional. They existed in the early church for light. So
they were the equivalent of just turning on the light switch.
Right. There's 2 candles on the altar in case one goes out. You shift the book over, there's candelabras in the back so that those singing in the back, aka the choir, can read their music, right? And it says they should be lit with a minimum amount of ceremony because they represent nothing other than candles, other than the light switch, we have so totally, we just skipped right over that note, went on to the next piece, right? Because we have the acolytes light the candles, and, it's this production, and that's fine. I'm not saying we should stop that, but that's a case of ideophora, right, or ideaphora, right?
I'm sensing a whole Monty Python skit in that.
Yeah, right.
Oh, holy light switch, we beseech thee.
Right, I mean, it's the same thing, right?
Connect thy circuits to the electrical grid.
Right, people are like, well, it represents the light of God. Not really, well, right, there's another one. We don't actually have it here, which is good. It's in the chapel.
Is that the eternal flame thing?
Right, the eternal flame thing, and actually what that is supposed to be for is in Catholic and Orthodox churches and Episcopalian churches, if there's leftover sacrament, what we call reserved sacrament, in the host box on the altar, that candle is lit to tell you there is host there, and one, approach the box with reverence because Jesus is there, and two, you can have, if you need some, here it is, right? And that's actually what that candle is for. Where we Protestants went wrong is we said, well, Jesus is always present.
So let's just keep a candle burning all
right,
the time.
so the candle should be burned all the time, but actually that candle it serves a very functional purpose in its original purpose, but now it becomes this ceremonial thing,
Just in and of itself.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's like, it must always be lit. It's like, well, we don't have reserved sacrament here. It could be put out permanently if you wanted to,
Fascinating. And yet we would probably get a ton of complaints if we decided to save electricity and
right.
turn it off.
We would. I knew a church, my MIC site. I was standing in the back of church talking to somebody, and Ned was his name, and he was about 80, and he pulled the chain down for the eternal candle, and after Sunday service was done, went, I kind of looked horrified. And another older lady was like, you just noticed Ned does that. I was like, how long has he been doing that? She goes, 40 years. I was like, what? And she's like, he thinks it's a waste. He doesn't want us to have to buy a new candle every week. He thinks we save money that way. So he blows it out after every service.
Well, if it's been the same candle for 40 years, it saves money.
It does, right. And we go through about one a week, if we were, I think ours is electronic, and so.
Yeah, the one here is a light
Yeah,
switch.
but if you have my previous church had a, physical one, and we went through about one a week,
Yeah. So ours is the eternal electric light switch on. So
right.
We're eternally contributing to the glory of climate change.
Yeah, right. Right. But again, all this stuff, right? Right. Yeah, Keith says we assume more than what it is. Yeah. So it's, and we keep doing it because I think it's good order, right? Like if I didn't act, everybody notices if I don't light the candles. And so it becomes more distracting for people's worship if the candles are lit versus not lit, right? Which is why he grabs it and lights them,
Yeah.
Do we need them? No, we have light bulbs, but it becomes more distracting for people.
Gotcha.
Is it worth fighting over the eternal candle? No, and we don't believe in reserved host, really. Yeah. So
I can save us some energy and go ahead and turn that off
if you wanted to. I will blame you when people come and say why, but
that's okay. As the house eco warrior, I will take it.
If you want to save that little electricity, because again, it doesn't.
Well, and Steve makes a point. LED flame instead, so that we could put an LED bulb in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah. Most get a little tiny solar panel to charge it. I would be happy with that.
That's fine. Most tradition is functional, right? And so they took the communion stuff away. So that little cardboard square thing I put on top of the cup.
Yeah.
That is all ceremonially done.
I assume that originated just as a cup cover to keep flies out.
That's literally what it's for. It is necessary to keep flies out.
Yeah.
And in a church, like my previous church was unair conditioned, and so in the middle of summer when you got all the windows open, it's actually pretty necessary because you'll get bugs who will find that wine really quick if you don't have that thing on top of it, Right.
Bugs.
Yeah, right.
That's why flies kind of fly circuitously.
Yeah, but you know, like that's the, like, again, this thing which we treat it with ceremonially, and we should, because how we treat communion is how we treat Jesus. You know, so like, I'm not saying this is a case of we should treat it with respect, but even the things we should treat with respect are actually terribly functional in their, you know, in their original purpose, right? Like, again, I think we should treat it with respect, but and so we do treat it ceremonially, and I said it very nicely, and I try to do all that, but it's not magic, it's functional. It's to keep bugs out of the wine. Yeah. You know.
Well, with that in mind, would the church founders, say, you know, from the first century, maybe even into the second, would they, if they came to a service today, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, would they laugh at all that? You know, have we added on?
You know,
so much.
It's hard to say. Well, right, they wouldn't speak English, right? So like,
well, assuming they had a universal translator, obviously.
There are pieces of we never get like, anywhere does it describe, unfortunately, we never get a bulletin from like one of Paul's churches. I wish we did, you know, but like we never get the order of service, you know, so like, but the way they describe, from the earliest stuff we have, it's described actually quite liturgical, you know, so, or at least it's a pattern that we follow, right? You know, so Justin Martyr is writing in the 120s. He's a philosopher who converts to Christianity, who's writing to Marcus Aurelius, trying to convince him Christians aren't bad people. Is basically what he's doing. He writes something called the Apology, and so he's just trying to describe what Christianity really is. And he's like, we're not anarchists, we're not these weird people who eat human beings and sleep with their siblings, like, you know,
like the rumors were.
Like the rumors are saying, like, you know.
Which is true. If you're outside and you think about the host, of course that's cannibalism.
Right. It's like they're cannibals who sleep with their siblings. You know, that was, you know, it's like, no, we're not antisocial. We're not anti-patriotic. You know, we help our neighbors. We follow the laws. Yada, yada, yada. You know, but in the midst of it, he describes Christian worship, and he says, well, he describes this pattern we still follow, where he says we gather together, gathering, you know, sing hymns. We read from the scriptures and from the letters of the apostles, word. You know, we then have the meal, you know, and then we are sent out. We actually call this the Western Rite because Justin Martyr's describing it, you know, and then we are sent out to do our discipleship, you know. And that's exactly the pattern of our worship, you know, to this day.
Yeah. But the meal has changed, right? Didn't they actually eat a meal?
Yeah, they had a full meal, right, in there. Right, for them it was a full meal. Right.
Yeah, Keith is saying the Moravians.
Right, some churches still do it this way. You know, and like our earliest actual liturgy, full liturgy, is from the mid-200s. It's the Liturgy of St. James, you know, which the Orthodox still do, you know, and it's from the 250s, you know, and it's a fully detailed, like, formal liturgy. Like Orthodox, it's a full liturgy. It's actually where we get the song, Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silent. Let all mortal flesh keep silent.
That goes all the way back?
Yeah, that's actually the tune is a French folk tune. But the words are actually the offertory of that liturgy. They're the sung response after the offering, you know, is collected.
Wow.
You know.
Well, given how old, I know we strayed from Christmas.
We strayed from Christmas, but this is all to say the early church, again, we don't have the apostles thing, and so everybody likes to imagine the apostles thing is like this free-flowing, you know, very charismatic, no rules service. But the earliest stuff we actually get is actually quite formal, you know, and so it's like that begs the question, either there was this is all still pre-Constantine, right? So like either you can't even blame Constantine for it. So like either there was the apostles died and the very next generation changed everything, or the thing they were doing from the very beginning was in some sense liturgical as we know it, and maybe that, and obviously that developed and changed and changes over time and becomes more so, but that begs the question, if Justin Martyr is describing essentially the same pattern of worship that we have today,
was this actually founded by the apostles?
Right. What were the apostles really doing this modern evangelical worship service, or were they doing, something far more liturgical? I would argue they were doing something far more liturgical, given that very quickly afterwards, after they die, we start seeing all these very formal liturgies,
Is there a parallel with synagogue services at the time? Would they have structured that liturgical formula from what they had experienced?
I mean, there's an adaptation, right? And the centrality of reading the word and, gathering and stuff like that, right? It's different, obviously, but
it could have been a template.
Emphasis on sermons and, that's all still very Jewish, and it's out, anyways. So
again, that shows, in a lot of senses, our Jewish roots.
Yeah, right. I mean, we didn't invent it whole. Nothing ever gets invented whole cloth, right? Right.
Wow. This is hard to pull it back into Christmas then, but.
Well, I mean,
let's go with hymns. He said Justin says that they sing hymns.
Right. We get hymns.
It seemed like in the medieval period.
And we get hymns in Scripture, right? Paul actually frequently sticks hymns into his letters. Philippians chapter 2 verses 5 to 11 is the most famous example, but vice versa, we pull from the Psalms and from we pull.
Go ahead.
Well, right, the Psalms they were the Israelite hymn book, right?
And we just adapt those.
Right, we just adapt those, but literally it's divided into 4 sections, and we've even got the music notes along with the, it'll say on some of them, break here.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Keith is saying that the ones that aren't songs, we've taken the poetic aspects,
right,
made them the lyrics to.
Right. The Israelites were poets, so it's all poetry, So, and so where that relates to, I guess, Christmas, if we want to, tie it all back together, is these things weren't just wholesale invented, and I would actually be more suspicious of them if they were, and the fact that things get begged and borrowed from other places, that earlier traditions get adapted in new ways. It's, the Christmas trees, right, or this earlier thing that gets adapted in a new way, and I'd be more suspicious if that didn't happen, C.S. Lewis had this, when he was still an atheist, C.S. Lewis's main objection to Christianity was, he thought it meant he had to give up all the mythology and stuff he loved, right? Because he's a teacher of early mythology and among many other things, and and that was his biggest objection. He thought he just had to say it was all false, and it was Tolkien, when he was talking with Tolkien about it for a very long time, that Tolkien finally said to him, no, it doesn't mean it's all false, because if Jesus Christ really is the truth incarnate, then he's this, anchor point, or what do they call him in Doctor Who?
A fixed point in space and time.
Right, the fixed point in space and time that literally is refracted throughout all the rest of, he's the only fixed point in space and time,
So it refracts out.
So it refracts out into every culture everywhere, because he is the truth. When Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, it doesn't just mean he's got a true message. He's literally truth itself. And so that truth is kind of refracted in broken pieces and broken ways across all sorts of cultures, and so Tolkien said Jesus becomes the myth made real, is how Lewis puts it eventually, right? That what we're longing for and hoping for and kind of get in broken ways and all the myths and all the little traditions from other cultures becomes real finally, in Jesus, right? As
see all those shards put together.
Right. All the shards are finally, the real thing actually exists in Jesus, and so this is why O Little Town of Bethlehem has that great verse, right? The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. It's literally the hopes and fears of all of human culture are kind of finally made real, in this God incarnate.
Yeah.
And so, we should pull from places where we find helpful, because you know what? The myth is made real in Jesus. The myth isn't a threat to Jesus. It's this is Paul's speech to the Athenians on Mars Hill. He goes to Athens, and he sees that they've got a temple to the unknown God in case they missed one.
Come to the basics.
Right. And Paul literally gets up there and goes, I see you're very religious in every way. You've got all these temples, and he says, I've even got an altar, the unknown God, and well, the unknown God is now Jesus. You've been worshiping him and you didn't even know it, and now you should know it,
Pretty shrewd on Paul's part. It's a nice angle.
Right. It's a nice angle, right? And he goes, this unknown God that you worshipped is known in the God of Israel and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and finally the God of Jesus. And that's kind of true for all of human culture, right? We've all kind of been worshiping this, grasping toward this unknown God. And finally this unknown thing we're all grasping towards, Christmas is important because it becomes real in Jesus. We need look or grasp no further.
I think that's a good endpoint right there.
So endeth the lesson.
Now to figure out what we're going to talk about next week. So if you have any ideas, let us know. Anything you want covered, questions about, especially the Christmas season.
Yeah.
But pretty cool. Didn't go anywhere near what I thought when we began. So
who knows? Right.
That's how they all are.
Yes.
So thank you.
Peace, everybody.